For more than a year, the country of Ethiopia has been embroiled in a civil war. The federal government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali is at war with the Tigray People's Liberation Front from the Tigray region in the north of the country. Throughout the course of the fighting, war crimes have been committed, and the Tigray region has been experiencing a famine. Although starting in 2020, the origins of the war lie in the formation of the modern Ethiopian Empire State in 1889. This is the map of Ethiopia. Here are the Ethiopian highlands. Among the many inhabitants of these highlands, we are going to focus on two ethnic groups, the Amhara and the Tigrayans. The Amhara, the Tigrayans, and other Semitic-speaking ethnic groups are collectively called the Habesha. The Ethiopian highlands would be the cradle of a multitude of Ethiopian states, such as the kingdoms of Dumat and Aksum originating from there. Later in the medieval era, the Solomonic dynasty would rule over the region, forming the Ethiopian Empire. Although it did temporarily change hands during conflicts, the territory of the empire mostly remained restricted to the highlands. Then came the year 1889. A new emperor was crowned, called Menelik II. The new emperor then embarked on a campaign of expansion, annexing areas inhabited by other ethnic groups, such as the Sidama, the Oromo, and the Somali. At the end of this campaign, the Solomonic realm transformed into a modern empire state. Despite being in the minority, the Amhara were the dominant ethnic group in the empire state. The Amharic language and culture was imposed on other ethnicities with the intent to assimilate them. Even the Tigrayans, despite their similarity to the Amhara, felt sidelined under Emperor Menelik. The empire state was further consolidated in 1896 when an attempted Italian invasion was defeated. After Menelik's death in 1912, Ethiopia eventually came under the leadership of Emperor Haile Selassie. He continued on the path of modernization, which was initiated by Emperor Menelik II. However, Haile Selassie's reign was interrupted by a successful Italian occupation in 1936. This would be short-lived, as Ethiopian independence was restored in 1941 and Haile Selassie returned from exile. The former Italian colony of Eritrea also became an autonomous region of the Ethiopian Empire. Following the Second World War, the modernization drive was further accelerated by the emperor. Education was improved in the empire, which led to the growth of an educated class which was progressive in its outlook. However, the empire continued to be an absolute monarchy, with power centralized in the hands of the emperor. To the dismay of other ethnic groups, the empire continued to be dominated by the Amhara ethnicity. This centralization had been challenged before when the Tigrayans revolted in the Wayene revolt of 1943, only to be crushed by brutal force. Many in Ethiopia's educated and military class began to question the monarchy, leading to an attempted coup in 1960. However, the failure of the coup led to the emperor further consolidating his personal power, responding to dissent with brute force. The dominance of the Amhara caused the Eritrean nationalists to launch a 30-year-long struggle for independence, which was followed by Eritrea's annexation into Ethiopia. This downward spiral culminated in the overthrow of the emperor by military officers in 1974. After the overthrow of the emperor, the military officers officially abolished the monarchy and established an ideologically Marxist-Leninist military dictatorship. Internationally, Ethiopia then became a close ally of the USSR and the Warsaw Pact. With the rise of Mengistu Haile Mariam, the country experienced a period of brutal political repression called the Red Terror or Kei Shibir. and the famine. Under his leadership, Ethiopia also fought a war with neighboring Somalia over the Somali populated region of Ogaden. The failures of the Derg led to the rise of several armed movements against the junta. In Tigray, an armed movement called the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, was established. Ever since the establishment of the empire state in 1890s, the Tigrayans felt marginalized by the imperial government in Addis Ababa, the country of Ethiopia, the capital of Ethiopia. This led to the Woyene Revolt in 1943, which was crushed with British assistance. The memories of this revolt then fueled the emergence of the TPLF. Ideologically, the TPLF synthesized Marxism-Leninism with ethnic federalism, considering Tigray self-determination as a prerequisite to the formation of a genuine Marxist-Leninist state in Ethiopia. Linking their movement to the Woyene revolt, the TPLF declared their struggle against the Derg to be the Second Woyene. The movement found allies in other resistance movements that rose up against the Derg. One of those movements was the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or EPLF, which was based in Eritrea. Ideologically, this movement synthesized Marxism-Leninism with Eritrean nationalism. A coalition of ethno-nationalist resistance movements was then formed under the leadership of the TPLF, which was called the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, or EPRDF. The coalition excluded the resistance movements from Ethiopia, as the EPLF opposed the idea of remaining a part of Ethiopia. After about 16 years of conflict, the Derg collapsed and the capital of Addis Ababa finally fell to the EPRDF in 1991. The EPRDF established a new government, with TPLF chairman Meles Zenawi as the prime minister. The government inherited a country in ruin and was tasked with rebuilding it. They had to prevent the balkanization of Ethiopia while building the economy. A century after the establishment of the Amhara-dominated Ethiopian Empire State, the country was now on the verge of breaking apart. To prevent Ethiopia from disintegrating and to end the dominance of the Amhara, Prime Minister Meles proposed to reorganize the country as an ethnic federation. In this system, Ethiopia would be divided into ethnic regions, which would theoretically be given the right to secede from the country. Eritrea then used that right to formalize their independence from Ethiopia. However, it's to be noted that the ethnic federation did not amount to the dissolution of the Ethiopian state, as the federal government still maintained significant power. Meles also oversaw the rebuilding of the Ethiopian economy into one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. This happened because the government pragmatically abandoned communism in favor of state developmentalism, which is a form of mixed economics. However, along with his achievements, Meles's premiership also had its share of controversies. Although the policy of ethnic federalism was supposed to establish equality among Ethiopia's many ethnic groups, it led to the Tigrayans wielding disproportionately more power than the other ethnic groups. An example of this was how the Tigrayans were overly represented in the Ethiopian military. The policy had also been criticized by many for promoting ethnic divisions among the Ethiopian population. The EPRDF was also not democratic, considered by many to be a repressive dictatorship. Under Meles's leadership, Ethiopia went to war with Eritrea in 1998, which ended in an Ethiopian victory 2 years later. But the conflict still lingered on because Ethiopia rejected a peace agreement, which it perceived to be favoring Eritrea. Due to this conflict, the TPLF and the EPRDF and the People's Front for Democracy and Justice EPLF's successor and the ruling party of Eritrea since independence were now bitter enemies. After the death of Meles Zenawi in 2012, the ruling EPRDF coalition continued his policies. However, protests against the government broke out in Oromia, which led to a co- led to the coalition electing an ethnic Oromo named Abiy Ahmed as prime minister in 2018. A young man, the new prime minister desired to reform Ethiopia. He desired to democratize the country's political system and began to steer the country's economy towards a market economy. He also brought an end to the frozen conflict with Eritrea, establishing friendly relations with the country. However, he has faced opposition during his tenure. On the world stage, Ethiopia's plan of building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has led to tensions with Egypt. Internally, Abiy's reforms were opposed by the TPLF, who felt that they were losing their hold over Ethiopia. They also were critical of Abiy's friendliness towards Eritrea. In 2019, the party further felt disenfranchised when the Prime Minister, in an attempt to distance the country from ethnic federalism, merged all the parties within the EPRDF, except the TPLF, into a single party called the Prosperity Party. After Abiy's rise to power, the TPLF, under the leadership of Debretsion Gebre-Mikhael, began to run the Tigray region largely independent of the federal government. In September 2020, the regional government held elections which were deemed illegal by the government in Addis Ababa. This further heightened tensions between the Tigray regional government and the federal government, leading to the start of the war on the 3rd of November 2020. Many of the articles and videos about the conflict usually trace the roots of the conflict to the victory of the EPRDF in 1991 or to the Ethiopian Revolution in 1974. This does make sense to some extent, as the TPLF was formed in the 1970s, and the policy of ethnic federalism did originate from the victory of the EPRDF in 1991. However, this gives an incomplete picture of the war and its cause. The origins of the Tigray War lay in the establishment of the Ethiopian Empire State under Emperor Menelik. When Menelik established the Empire State in the 1890s, he essentially consolidated the position of the Amharas as the rulers of this diverse empire. This led to many in Tigray feeling sidelined, and to counter the imperialism of the Solomonic dynasty, they began to develop Tigrayan nationalism, which later led to the formation of the TPLF. When the TPLF overthrew the Derg in 1991, instead of seceding from the country, they dissolved the Empire State in favor of an ethnic federation. This didn't mean that the TPLF were no longer Tigrayan nationalists. However, this meant that they synthesized ethnic nationalism with a pan-Ethiopian identity. However, this system allowed the Tigrayans to wield disproportionately more power than other ethnicities, which encountered some resistance from them. This eventually led to protests that overthrew the TPLF in 2018. Abiy's actions as prime minister seem to indicate that he desires to abolish the ethnic federation. Therefore, I would argue that the root cause of the Tigray War is the conflict over the ethnic federation. If the TPLF is fighting to preserve the ethnic federation, while Abiy is fighting to dissolve it. If the TPLF wins the war, the ethnic federation will be re-established. However, if Abiy succeeds, it's likely that the ethnic federation would be dissolved. But we are unsure on what would he replace it with. Will it be the re-establishment of the empire state, or will it be a federation with Addis Ababa possessing more power than it does now, or will it be a unitary state? If the war remains to be a stalemate, then Abiy would have to abandon the Tigray region and continue with his plans for the rest of Ethiopia. This would be similar to the secession of Eritrea in 1991, which precipitated the formation of the ethnic federation. Just like the EPRDF victory in 1991, the Tigray War is a turning point in Ethiopian history. Whoever wins this bloody war will define Ethiopia's future, perhaps for decades to come.